for our quality assurance, performance accountability event. We're doing this in lieu of a biweekly call this week, so I'm happy that so many of you decided to go ahead and utilize this time to join this meeting. I am curious how many new staff we have out there, so if you are a new director or new to your key position at your local AEL provider, throw me a thumbs up. I want to see how many thumbs up we get. Are you new? How many new folks do we have? And when I say new, I mean like under 2 years. If you've been in your position under 2 years, I still think that that's pretty new for all of the responsibilities that you probably have and everything that you've been learning over the last couple of years here in Adult Ed. So I wanted to set this up really quickly for Elena this morning. We have here, and we always will be, I think, putting out a lot of guidance, right? So we put out a lot of guidance here from the Texas Workforce Commission down to our AEL providers, and that comes out in the form of guides. It comes out in AEL letters. We have non-regulatory guidance. We've got a testing guide, a performance guide. We've got tons of information that always is coming out. And we understand that it is a lot. And so what we are really trying to do is build some tools and some resources for those of you that are in these key positions at the local level that are providing oversight, monitoring, performance accountability type job duties and functions. So Elena is going to be going over some tools and resources today that really we want and hope that they will assist you with your local monitoring efforts that you have, your local planning efforts that you have and that you're conducting. And a big part of it is data integrity. So at the end of the year, as you are well aware, we send all of our information, we compile some federal reports, all of that goes to Octane, and it really tells the story of what we're doing here in Texas and how we're meeting the compliance aspects of our funding from the feds. So the data integrity piece is crucial. And we want to make sure that we're being very diligent and thoughtful and helping to scrub that data and absolutely report the most accurate data that we can. So the tools and resources that Elena is going to be going over today are to help to support all of those efforts. It is also to help us at the Texas Workforce Commission to develop technical assistance and professional development opportunities in the future. So I don't want you guys to feel like you do this and you go through this exercise and then what do we really do with that information? Well, we utilize that information to sit down and do some thoughtful planning ourselves. So we're going to use that feedback that we're getting from you to develop any technical assistance events and work with our professional development system next year to develop content that's really going to be geared towards your needs in the field. So it's a very, important task for us here. I hope you guys will see value in the tools and the resources that we are providing. We want to continue to do more of this. The other thing I will say is I asked Elena that at the end of the year that we provide an evaluation opportunity for you to give us feedback on the tools and resources. That's going to help us to make any changes, modifications, or maybe develop any new tools and resources in the future to really assist you in those local functions of your job. And how you're looking at and how you're doing your local monitoring and how you're looking at performance accountability. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elena, and I'm actually going to jump off. I have another meeting, but I thank you so much for being here today and welcome. Elena, over to you.
Thank you, Mahalia. I'm going to remove the chat right now. I've been looking at it, seeing who's coming into the room. We have a full house. We're up to about 130 people on the call right now. So I'm very excited. That means this information is getting out to people. And that's really what we want to see happen. We want to make sure that people are included in receiving information that will be beneficial to you in understanding, again, what Mahalia had mentioned, guidance, policy. At a minimum, where do I find things? Especially if you're a new person, it can be pretty overwhelming and frustrating when, you know that there is something that maybe needs to be happening in your program, but you really just don't know where to find the policy or information that gives you a little bit more information on that. So some of these tools will help with that. And again, as Mahalia mentioned, these are tools. They're things that can be used, and I'll give you a little bit more explanation on them and how they're different from each other. So most of you may be familiar with the end of year checklist because it's been something that's been put out for several years now. We send it out generally to the administrators and directors, and then they're supposed to send it out to staff or work with their staff to get it done. The detailed program review or detailed provider review is something that we put out last year. And it was more of a pilot to get it started, at least to get it out into the field. We've revamped it to be more in alignment with some things that happened, some changes with policy. And so we'll give you some information on that. But I guess I didn't really introduce myself. Mahalia did mention who I was. For some of you, you may have met me before or have worked with me in some capacity. My name is Elena Madrid. I am the supervisor for our department. I was a program specialist for a long time, so I work directly with programs, and I don't want to claim that I know the difficulties and all the challenges that you go through in providing services, but I like to think that I've built some good relationships with people out in the field, and I do appreciate your sharing of your knowledge and also how far you have come over the last few years. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank Anne Marie and Beth who are helping me with the presentation today. There will be opportunity to ask questions. I didn't build them into my slides, but as they come into the chat, Anne Marie will be assisting me and letting me know when something comes in, and we can address that. The other thing is I want to thank my team. It took a lot of people to get the detailed program review where it's at, and everybody has been working really hard to do the updates and giving their perspectives of what they know in working with their programs out in the field. So thank you, Maria. Thank you, Linda, Veronica, and everybody else on the team that has contributed in some way. Blanca was helping me with some screenshots this morning. So thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I think we already had our introduce yourself in the chat. I saw a lot of people putting their names in, what programs you were from. But what I really would like to know, and I'm interested in, is why did you sign up? So this QAPA session is not just for the quality assurance or program accountability positions or the directors, but we really wanted to make sure that we had those key individuals to receive this information. Because as you know, quality assurance and program accountability staff really should know the grant. They should understand monitoring. They should be looking to be updated on policy so that they are a key individual or resource that your staff can go to ask questions and get some clarification on things. So we really wanted to provide that support. These positions were required of this RFA 3/2018-01. But there hadn't been a lot of support provided before. So this year, we really wanted to make an effort. I believe this is our fourth session providing information. The last one, I believe, was the monitoring session and going over what monitoring's expectations are when they go out into the field. So again, you know, if you're not the quality assurance or program accountability person or the director, why did you sign up today? So this training was open to everybody. I know there's a lot of people on the call today. Right now, I see about 139. So if a few of you could, you know, put in the chat, why are you joining today? Maybe you're just curious. Maybe you like to be in the loop of things. Maybe you're going to be responsible for doing some of these things. Maybe you just like doing PD and TA. I'm not sure. I know there's a lot of lifetime learners sometimes, and every time there's an opportunity to learn something, you're on it. You're like, I want to hear about it. I may never use it, but that's okay. So let's see. I'm going to look at the chat. I see it's important to me to be informed. I am responsible for these things and training our new AEL director. Okay, that's a huge responsibility. Whenever you have to train a new staff member, it can be a lot. Because you have to think about what is all the information that would be helpful to that person, but also trying to come from their perspective, being you, and really what is their experience with AEL and this grad? Because as you know, there are a lot of different things that go into services, and there's a lot of expectation when it comes to services. Let's see, seeing and learning what's new. Okay, I see, to learn how to better support my colleagues. That's awesome. I think that's one of the most admirable things or skills or personality traits is that desire to empower other people, to help other people. And I think our team really takes that perspective, not just with our team members, but with people in the field. We, anytime you reach out to any of the program specialists, we do our best, the team does their best to help you with what you're looking for, or we try to connect you with someone in the field that can help you better than we could, because we don't implement services directly. We're not going to pretend like we're the subject matter experts on everything. So we try to connect people. Quality assurance lead, stay informed on new changes. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing. I think if anything, it's important to know at a minimum, why are you here for yourself? If you're here and not even knowing why, then that could be a little bit, I think, concerning. So that's great. So thank you for sharing. So let's move forward. Okay, the meeting's already being recorded. I think there are probably a few people who will not be on this call today, and we want to make sure that they get the information, especially as you're learning the information. You might realize, man, I don't think I can explain all of this. It might be better if you just hear it directly from the stage. It's always nice to have a recording available so that you can share. And also, we have a new staff member on our team as well. So we want to make sure that we get the information recorded for our staff too. I know Veronica's out in the field right now. She's visiting with Dallas. So she's not going to be part of this conversation either. So we want to make sure that resource is available for her. Okay, so the agenda for today. So we're going to go over the end of the year checklist. Answering some basic questions. What is this? How is it used? What are the benefits? So for those of you, again, who have been with us some time and who have had experience with the end of year checklist, you already know what to do with it. It's a tool you get at the end of the year. But if you're a new person, a new director especially, you may not be familiar with this. And if you started this year, you would not have had the experience of going through the process last year with this checklist. So I definitely want to make sure everybody has at least a foundation, a basic understanding of what this tool is used for and why it was created. Next, we're going to go over the detailed provider review. Now, that's a little bit lengthier document, and it's used for a different reason, but we'll be answering what is it? Why is it used? How is it used? And again, what are the benefits? And then we're going to be moving into the bigger picture. So what do I mean by that? I think a lot of times we may have tools and resources, or we even are working on things, but we're working in silos. So what does that mean? That means, well, even in partnerships, community college may want to work with an employer and they're doing all great things, but unless they're coming together, they're continuing to kind of, again, do their own thing, and efforts aren't being merged so that larger things and better outcomes can happen. So that's what we want to make sure happens with this detailed provider review. We don't want it to be like the deliverables have been in the past, where it's something you just fill out and you turn in and you don't get any feedback on it, or it's not really used for anything else. So I want to show you how it fits into the bigger picture and how it's going to be used to help to develop statewide TA and also to work with the TCAL team. And then, rolling into 22, 23, this is the last year. Well, not this year, but the new program year will be the last year for this grant. So thinking about how are you preparing for that? What would you like to accomplish? How do you want to finish in that year? So, that's something that, having this conversation now and getting this information now could really impact what shows up for you in the new program year. So objectives for today, I wasn't going to include these, but it's, in any presentation, you probably should have people at least understand what they might be getting out of this. So understand the difference between the end of the year checklist and detailed provider review. Be informed on how to use each tool. Learn how TWC develops statewide PD, or how we've been actually transitioning into that. Now, prior to last year, there wasn't much initiative in that direction. We were kind of just, building things as we needed it. We're trying to be a little bit more strategic in what types of PD and TA we put out for a couple of reasons. One, we're a very small staff here in our department. We have 3 program specialists that are overseeing the core grants. So that on average, there's about 12, they have about 12 programs each. That's a lot of programs. And if each program is asking for TA, and maybe they're asking for the same type of TA, it just really makes sense to create something that we can put out at the state level, as opposed to having to do individual trainings for each provider on the same topic. Also, leave better informed than when you started the webinar. So I'm hoping that you'll get some information, things will be clearer for you, and you'll feel good about attending. I mean, it's not fun when you go to a webinar or a presentation and you say, man, I don't even know what happened there. 2 hours of my life just passed before me. All right, so let's start with the end of the year checklist. Now, the end of the year checklist, again, is a document that is put out by our department every year to the field, and it's really meant to help you. Why was it created? It was created because in our department, we were noticing that there were quite a few items that were left undone. So what's really important to know, and I can't emphasize this enough, and I hope that you're hearing me, once the data closes out at the end of the year, you cannot make changes to your hours. You cannot enter PD. You can't go in and modify a class. You can't do any of those things. So the end of the year closeout will be July 15th in terms of the requirement for getting everything into the database. So I know some of you are in consortiums, and that requires you getting things done earlier than that so that your grant recipient can make sure that they meet the deadline. So when I say July 15th, it might be earlier for some of you that are on the call today. And I really want you to understand why. It's not because your grant recipient is putting pressure on you and, kind of being a nag maybe about, hey, you need to get this in by July 8th. And you're questioning, but we have until the 15th. Well, you don't really have till the 15th. They have till the 15th. The grant recipient does. July 15th. So on the checklist, that was the main reason why it was developed, because we wanted to make sure everybody got their stuff in, got things closed out, so that at the end of that time period, there wasn't any worry about, hey, I really need to get this stuff in, and can you open it up? Because there won't be an option for that. So on the end of the year checklist, you'll see a couple of things. You'll see a couple of sections. You'll see a section for staff. So there's items that are related to your staff. There's a section for participants, grant management and deliverables, classes, training services, validation, and data sign up. Now, again, I want to mention that this was developed to help you. It's not something that we use as a deliverable. It's not a like, you better do this or you're out of compliance. It's none of those things. Like, we understand at this time in the year, everyone's busy. You guys are ending your own program year. You might have reporting to other organizations or institutions. you're using other databases besides Teams. Maybe you're using OneFlow that you have to get information in. There's reports that are due. But on top of that, in terms of services, maybe you have graduation going on. There's a lot of planning involved in that. Maybe you're already thinking about being on vacation. Maybe your body's still here, but your mind is already on vacation. Maybe you're still teaching classes. Maybe you're wearing multiple hats. You're having to act as the QA, but there you are teaching a TSI preparation course or something. Or maybe you're just thinking about what's that next YouTube video I want to watch. Some of you might be watching that now, but I hope not. I hope you're paying attention to what we're sharing today. Okay, so again, we're going to be covering what is the end of the year checklist, who would use it, how would you use it, and what are the benefits. So I just wanted to mention that I'm not going to go into detail on every single item on the checklist. That would just take too long, because I have a lot of confidence that you are very capable of reading on your own. So I don't want to, bore you to death with that, but I will point out some areas that you probably want to put focus to, because maybe it wasn't on last year's checklist, or maybe it's something that we keep continuing to overlook for the closeout at the end of the year. Okay, so what does the checklist look like? You should have received a copy in your email if you signed up for this presentation. And I believe Anne-Marie was also going to upload it into the chat. So I hope that you got these materials. I know they were sent right before this presentation, but you will have the opportunity to look over it. So this document, what's really nice about it is you don't have to print it out if you don't want to. You can just use it on your computer, on your iPad. You'd be able to just check off the items as you go. And it's not very long, quite honestly. It's nothing compared to the detailed provider review that we will be speaking about shortly. But this is what it looks like for the most part. One thing I want to emphasize is what's put at the top. Again, your deadline to get these things complete, for the most part, will be July 15th. There might be a deliverable or two that you need to turn in for the grant recipients. Again, this may not necessarily be directed towards a subrecipient, but there is an end of the year report that is due. And, there's things with accounting and spending that need to be tidied up by the end of July, I believe. And I think there's information on here for that. So I want to emphasize that. If you have any questions, so you're going down the list and you're like, oh man, I really need some help with this, and it's related to something in Teams. Maybe it's like, you know what, we noticed that we need to make this change before we do a final validation or something. That's something you would reach out to Teams technical assistance on. Or maybe it's something like you need to get a funding code, get access to a funding code. That's another example of what you would reach out to Teams technical assistance on. But I want to remind you, if you're in a consortium, if you're in partnership, you need to be going through your grant recipient. It's not because we don't want to hear from you. We love talking to everybody. But just for purposes of the grant recipient staying informed of what's going on with their providers, but also for us, could you imagine us getting requests from everybody in the field? That would just be crazy. So we want to try to streamline things. That's why we set up this email, so things can go directly here when it comes to Teams assistance. Now, if you have a general TA question, technical assistance question, you can submit it, or the grant recipient can submit it to aelta@twc.texas.gov. That is another email that we had set up. The other option is reaching out to this program specialist that is assigned to that grant or to that provider. So there's a couple of options. If you're going down this list, you have questions, then you can definitely reach out. Don't feel like, you know what, I'm just not going to do it because I really don't even know what's being asked here. Now, that's interesting, because if that happens, if you come across something and you realize, I really don't even know what they're asking me here for, then that is an indication of having to get that assistance, having to reach out to your team members and say, hey, what are we needing to do here? So it's really, really important that you understand what you're agreeing to or what you're checking off. So the end of the year checklist can be used to help you keep track of data validation. So that's a big part of it, and closeout procedures that need to be completed prior to June 30th. So again, you can use it on your electronic device, or you can print it out and have a copy of it. One thing I do want to point out is that when you're using it, you may notice that looking at the document, some of the text looks hidden. If you click on that area, it will expand and you can see everything. Or you can always modify the document for yourself. You can increase those row sizes. You know, if you're going to be printing it, you want to see all the text. The other thing I would also like to recommend is, if you want to add more stuff to it, go for it. If you're like, you know what, we have these other things that you guys didn't consider that we definitely have to stay on top of, you can modify it and use it any way you want. But basically, you know, we just wanted to use it as a help and a resource. So that is pretty much what it is. Now I'm going to go into some specific areas. But just before that, does anybody have any questions? Okay, and if at any time I'm talking too fast, please let me know. I got up knowing I had to do a presentation. I was really tired. I drank some coffee. I took a shot of B12, and then I broke out with the essential oils, and I was like inhaling all this peppermint and fir, whatever, pine trees stuff. And so I can be a little wound up right now. So if I'm going too fast for you, please reach out and say, hey, Ellen, I need you to slow down just a little bit.
I'm not seeing any questions at this time.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to try this. Oops, going back. I want to try something, see if it works. Yay. So I just, I didn't know about this. So for those of you who have known about it for a long time, please don't make fun of me. But using the laser pointer option that is in PowerPoint, I learned quite a few new things in developing this PowerPoint, and I'm not trying to promote anything, but I'm one of those people, if I find something that works and I like it, I like to share. So I am using Simple Slides. That's a new software technology that I found to use with PowerPoint, and they make things really simple. So Simple Slides. I also am using the morph option or transition. So as you see the slides going in and out, that's the morph option that you can use on PowerPoint. And I now know how to use this laser pointer, which is control and left click, if anybody is interested. Kind of a nerd that way, you know, with technology and stuff. Okay, so what things do we want to put some focus on? So some of these things are pretty familiar to you. Did you get your professional development hours entered? You guys are asked that all year long, so there shouldn't be an issue with that. Have they met the required PD? So if you're not familiar with the required PD, we put some additional information in the how. One, how do you enter it? You know, where do you need to go? Where do I find this information, maybe in Teams? And then additional information, just kind of giving you a little bit more background on some of these things. So we thought that would be helpful. I believe that has always been included, but we always go through it to see if things are updated. End dates are entered for staff that are no longer employed. So this, I believe, was something that was new entered. Really important. Why is it important? Because one, once the data closes out, you can't change that end date. Two, if a person has left employment, a staff member has left employment, and they're still active in Teams, one, they probably are still active with access to Teams, but two, it looks to us that they're still employed. So when monitoring comes in, they may be looking at your staff, seeing, you know, payroll, looking at or comparing who is still with you, who's still getting paid. And you don't want people on there that really are no longer part of your team. You want to make sure that end date matches when they left employment. So if you don't have a process in place to catch that, because I know you know when a staff member leaves, because you guys tell us all the time, we lost our, financial person, or we lost our career navigator. So you know when those people are leaving. So what you need to do is go into Teams and make sure that exit date matches the end date. So please do not forget to do that. The other thing is employment profiles for active staff have their qualifications updated. So what does that mean? Well, if you go into their profile, there's an area where you're supposed to update, and I think it's asking for like education. So qualification example, generally for your instructor level, we're asking for a bachelor's degree. So you would go in there and you would update every year. Now we're seeing a lot of times these employment profiles aren't being updated. And sometimes it's because the staff is no longer there. So of course, why would you need to update it? Well, then that end date should have been added to that staff profile to complete that. So those are a couple of things. Let me see where this thing goes next.
Elena, we did have a question from Jeff.
Yeah.
If we have employees that remain with us year to year, do we put an end date as June 30th each year, or just leave it open-ended until they are no longer employed?
And that's a great question. And it'll show here an additional information, and I'll use my little laser pointer. If you have a staff that's continuing, leave the end date open. You don't need to put a deadline of June 30th. Now, that might change for next year. I mean, at the end of next year, since it'll be the closing of the RFA, I'm not sure if we're gonna require that all staff get a June 30th end date, but for this year, just leave them open if they're gonna be with you. Great question. So again, we're going to provide where do you find this information, and what is some additional information that goes along with that light item. The last thing that I wanted to point out on this list is the Teams account access has to be removed for staff that are no longer employed. There is some guidance if you reference AEL letter 0218 change 1. It talks about when a staff member leaves, you have 24 hours to notify us that they no longer should have access to Teams. Because unless you make that request, that individual no longer being with you can get in and depending on what their access level is, may be able to make changes to your data. And you really don't want that to happen. So again, updating their profile is really important, and also checking on their account access. And I know Blanca does a wonderful job at sending out reminders. She has a beautiful list of who is active, who isn't active, what things need to be modified. If you need that information, because sometimes you can't tell very easily going in and looking at reports or the profiles, just reach out to Teams technical assistance. Blanca will provide you with a list. She has one ready for you, I guarantee. So just reach out and you can get that. But again, if you're a subrecipient, please make the request through your grant recipient, and they will make the request to our Teams technical assistance. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions, just some love for Blanca.
Blanca is a hard worker, I'll tell you that. And she's always in a good mood, which, I wish I could embody. Okay, one other thing I want to make very clear is an employment profile is not the same as having Teams access. So just because you are listed as an employee in Teams doesn't mean you have an account that gives you access to Teams. So that's also really important to remember. And it can also be vice versa. You can have access to Teams, but never be listed as an employee in Teams. So those are two separate things. And that's why, we want to emphasize that you're keeping track of both things. Okay, so again, we're gonna have a lot of different sections in here, staff. And again, you have the document, so you can pull it out and you can look at it. One for participants. Participants is gonna be the longest section. I'm actually not covering anything in participants today, but that is the longest section that you'll be dealing with. We also have classes, training services, validation and data sign-off, and grant management. So let's look at staff. What are some things we should be looking at staff? There's staff work. So we have the professional development, required PD. Oh, maybe this is the same thing. Let's see. Oh, so one thing here that I wanted to point out is if you have a change to staff, we changed the process this year. So in the past, it was kind of, you know, if you remember to let us know, you sent an email, and then maybe we got our contact sheet updated, and then maybe, you know, everybody got the information they needed. But if our listserv wasn't updated, you probably weren't getting the information. So we wanted to change that. We wanted to make sure everything was going into one place. So what we do at the beginning of a new grant, the long form would be filled out. So the long form's pretty detailed. We ask about all the different positions, who filled those positions. And then we want to keep record of when the changes happen, how often they happen. So we wanted to simplify that, because in the past, we would probably send out the contract information form at least once a year. But we said, you know what? If that's the only time we're capturing it and we're relying on emails, it's very inconsistent to capture the information in a timely manner. So what we wanted to do is simplify the process. So you only get the long form once at the beginning of the grant. So next grant cycle, we will have that long form put out once, you know, everybody's positions are in place. And then moving forward, you fill out a change form. That's very short. It only really asks, okay, who is leaving and who is replacing that person, if you know. And it's very simple, it's very short, and you would go to DocuSign. In this document, the link for where you would go to make those changes is accessible. So you would click on there and it would take you directly to the form. So we changed that process and made it easier, I think, and less I think complicated on our end too, in terms of capturing information. So that's everything in the staff section that I wanted to point out. So let's go to classes. I'm gonna say this again, maybe mention it a couple of times. No classes will be rolling over. So last year, no classes were supposed to roll over either. I understand that sometimes you start a class in June and it's continuing into July. I understand that, but we are asking that no classes are ended. So for your summer classes, you should have an end date. Even if they started like only 2 weeks before the program year ended, you should have an end date for June 30th. And then in the new program year, July 1st, you're creating a new class. So I know sometimes it's a bit ridiculous and it's a lot of extra work, you know, in building out classes. But in terms of us keeping our data clean and making sure everything is closed out, that's what we have to happen on our end. So please, please, please remember, no classes will be rolling over for the new program year.
Elena, that raised a question for Larissa. Will we be able to roll over student hours into a new class?
No. So what happens is Teams does it on the back end. So let's say you had a class that started for 2 weeks, it went 2 weeks, all those hours are captured and go for this program year. And then when the new program year starts, let's say you start your class right on July 1st, it's the same class, you're capturing those hours for that class. And it's going to go towards a new program year, but it's all going to count towards that person's period of participation. So starting a new class and interrupting, you know, their hours, for the class is not going to change their period of participation status unless they officially exited from services. So the hours are still following the student. It may not, you may not be able to say, for this one class, looking at one class, I can see the total hours, 50 hours. Maybe you see 25 for this program year and then 25 for the next program year. But in total, that student, if you're using the POP report, you're going to see all of their accumulated hours. Does that answer your question? So they're not losing hours.
We have an I think so. So,
well, I know there's someone out there probably on your team who can explain it, but if not, reach out. And I don't know if you're a subrecipient or not. If you might, the grant recipient could probably provide that information. If you are a grant recipient, definitely reach out to your program specialist. And again, yeah, so you're going to read some of the stuff and you're like, I don't even know what that means. Someone probably has the answer. So find that person and they're going to assist you. So IET classes attached to the correct training service. We're working on this right now. We understand that it can be complicated in setting up training services when you are a large provider. Maybe you're a college, and what we had envisioned in terms of training service setup isn't really aligning with what's happening in the field or isn't as user friendly, but it is what it is right now. You need to attach all your training classes, all your IET classes. So there's 3 components to an IET. And I have to emphasize this enough. You can't just do the training without contextualized instruction, direct hours, or workforce preparation and call it an IET. And we've seen that happening, at least with data. So we have many situations where programs are, putting in the training hours, but not the direct hours, or maybe they're putting in the direct hours, but they're never recording the training hour, or vice versa, whatever it is. If we go on Teams and we see that happening, we're assuming that those components are taking place. And that's why it's really, really important, if you want to get credit for your efforts, that you're meeting all of these criteria. And if you're not familiar with IETs, maybe you're a new director. Maybe, it just wasn't your wheelhouse and now you're the career navigator or you're responsible for setting up IETs. There is so much of information available on this. There are so many resources. You're going to see some of them here in these documents, especially the detailed provider review. We've attached AEL letters. We put where you can find things in the different manuals that we have. Just look through the document first. If you still have questions, then definitely reach out to someone that can help you. Grant recipients, that will be your program specialist. Training hours are recorded in Teams for our participants. And so again, this is just what I mentioned. You can see that in AEL letter 0216 change 1. If you're not familiar with AEL letters, that is something, if you're in a position of a QA, a PA, a director, you need to know these AEL letters because it's going to give you the policy and the guidance for the changes that are occurring in things associated with this grant. So please, please, please get to know where these things are and get to understand which letters apply to the different services that are being offered.
So we have several questions. Would you like them now or do you want me to hold?
Yeah.
Okay. So we kind of have a 2-part follow-up from Larissa.
Okay.
So she said, students, let me read both questions and I think you can address them at the same time. So students start the new year with 0 hours, but their POP still has the previous year's hours. And then we are wondering if we need to retest everyone or if their test will roll over.
So the test follows them. And you're correct on the first one. So they're starting with the 0 hours for the program year, right? But not for their POP. And that's where you guys have to understand the difference between program year and how data was captured before. Those are the old reports. Your MSG and POP reports are capturing everything based on a period of participation. So doesn't matter how long the student was in services, as long as they didn't exit, those hours are following that student. Now, your second question, could you repeat that? Beth?
Yes, ma'am. We are wondering if we need to retest everyone or if their tests will roll over.
So their tests are valid for 365 days. And there is guidance available for that. We made that change. We try to change it to, I think, 180 days, because this idea of like, we need to make sure people are getting tested in a timely manner. Well, when COVID hit, it was just nearly impossible to get anybody tested. So we changed it back to 365 days. So that means that test is good and makes a student eligible for services. So there is no reason to retest them just because a new program year has started. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Let's see. I've got a question from Linda. Rollover related question. Does it mean we have to have a beginning date and end date for classes beginning July 1? That is for our summer classes.
Right. So for the classes that continue on, yes, the start date would be July 1, unless, let's say your class ended June 30th and you guys took a week off. So your start date wouldn't be July 1st. It would be whenever that class resumed. So your start and end date should match when activities or services are taking place. It shouldn't be like, oh, we're starting at July 1st, but students don't actually participate until July 18th. That's not what we should be seeing in teams.
All right. And Pilar asked about the 365-day rule for test validity, which I think you've addressed. So what if the IET support class comes before the training starts? For example, an IET support class is May 1st through June 15th, but the training is scheduled for June 1st through June 15th. Are those students funded as IET for both class for both months?
So technically you wouldn't be getting credit for an IET for this program year because you're only offering the direct hours. So if I'm going in teams and I'm seeing your contextualized class with direct hours and the program year ends and the data is closed off and there's no training attached to it, I'm going to say that it wasn't an eligible service in respect for an IET, at least for that program year.
So Elena, this is Anne.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in because I'm reading that question. You may not be able to see it. It looks like the training starts June 1st and ends June 15th. So maybe it's like a CDL, one of those short courses. So you would need to make sure that you've created a training service and attach the classes to that training service and use an IET fund code. So that would be my answer to that. And you're welcome to reach out if you need more information.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with Anne Savino, even though she's pretty good at meeting everybody, she's our subject matter expert when it comes to career pathways and IETs.
And then we had a quick question from Todd about, are we changing the test time back from the 365 days? And Maria responded, not at this time. So I think we're good.
Yeah, you can be pretty assured that this last program year, there won't be a change to that 365 days. Okay, so that is what we had for classes. Now training services. So training services, and this is another area that we're looking at making some changes for. Right now, the requirement is, and the reason why it is done that way is how we've been tracking our IETs. So really what we're looking to see is that training is being recorded, that part of the IET is happening, and that is the big identifier of when, for reporting purposes, when the IET is, I wouldn't say getting started, but it's it should be complete, right? Because you have the contextualized instruction, you have the training. So sometimes we have contextualized instruction start before training, like Pilar had just mentioned. Sometimes we have training start before the contextualized instruction. Sometimes they start on the same day. But for purposes of the training services start date, it really should match the training start date for the class. So for those of you who aren't familiar with setting up this in Teams, there should be someone on your team that is. So you have the classes that you have in Teams for your IET, and then you have the training service. And you'll see that in Teams because on the column, you'll see something for training services right under classes, I believe, when, to click on for an option. But when you're setting up your training service, that start date should really be matching the class start date for the training. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole on that, but for purposes of closing this data, that's what we're looking for. Let's see. So this here, I can't remember it was mentioned on the last end of the year checklist, but all participants in training services are updated with either complete or withdrew. And I can tell you, I've gone in there and I've seen that this isn't happening for all the programs that are offering IETs, but it does need to happen. So I'm going to show you here in a moment how to do that in Teams, because if you're not familiar with it, you probably don't know where to find it. So if you go into Teams, you have to go into training services. So again, I mentioned when you're setting up an IET in Teams, you set up the classes for contextualized instruction and training, maybe workforce preparation if that's going on, but you also set up the training service. So you go into training services, and if you're setting up the IET correctly, those classes will be attached to the training services, and they will show up here under training service. Every class that's attached to any particular training service will show up. So then we go, oops, gosh, I'm thinking I'm in Teams. I'm trying to click on that, on the hyperlink. Oh gosh, too much Teams in my life. So once you go in there, you're going to see the class, and you're going to see, or the assigned classes in the trainings that are attached to the training service. And then you're going to see every single participant that is listed in any of those classes that are attached. Now, to do the complete or withdrew option, you're going to want to click on one of the individuals, one of the participants, and then you're going to see a training status option show up. So once you see that, you're just going to go ahead and click on there, and then you'll see completed or withdrew. Oops, sorry. So anybody that's in an IET, you want to make sure this is done. So you say, Elena, well, the program is still continuing to the new program year. We're closing out this class. So in that case, you wouldn't choose any because they haven't completed that IET yet, or they haven't withdrew from it. But when that IET closes, when that course is done, you really should be going in there and indicating what happened with that individual. Any questions on that? Or Anne, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, not at this time. Thanks.
We do have several questions. Paul has a question about process between a CBO and a community college that he says is kind of off topic. Paul, what I think I'll do with that one is I'm going to save that question and I'll pass that one to Anne, because that could get a little lengthy. Tara asked, if an IET participant completed the training but didn't earn a passing score in that college credit training, can we check that as completed in Teams?
What do you say to that, Anne?
Yeah, I would say that you can check it as completed because it'll show up that they didn't earn an MSG or a credential at some point along the pathway. So it would look to us like, yeah, they finished, but they didn't get an outcome.
All right, and then we have a question. Do we have an update on when the training services will be available from the student profile?
They are, I think. So if you go in, yeah, so you'll see that they're there, but I don't think you can actually access the training service. It's probably not a priority on the list of requests for teams right now, but we definitely can make a note of it and add it to whatever, you know, we have submitted. But there are other priorities at this time when it comes to the teams database.
Okay, and I think that the issue seems to be that they cannot update from the student profile. Excuse me. Can teams be updated to allow for multiple edits, updates at the same time instead of one at a time?
Yeah, that's something we'd have to ask the experts that are handling our our database. But I will make a note of it. So when you, well, I'll get back to that. I don't want to try to, you know, go into something I really can't give you a definitive answer for. So I will just put it on the table. Beth, can you make a note of who asked that question?
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate it.
And let's see. So Ray asked, and if an IET student completes the core completion, i.e. EKG, but does not pass certification, this is kind of a clarification on the marking complete. Are they marked as complete?
Yes.
All right, let me see. And then Kashawn, the training services start date has to match the training class start date or the student start date?
The class start date.
Okay, I think that one's answered. So I think we're good.
Okay, awesome. So we're at 10:58. So let's see what we have left. I was going to try to get through this part first and save, you know, time for the other section, but let's see where we're at. Grant management, this is the last section on the detailed program review. There are just a couple of things on here that you need to remember. There was a change to, let me see, is it here? So your expenditures, they need to be done by July 20th. So again, I had mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that July 15th is the deadline for data, for getting things entered into Teams. Now, there's going to be a couple of deliverables and things related to expenditures that will have a little bit later date. So please look at this form and make sure you're familiar with them. Put them on your calendar soon. So you're not trying to remember what was that thing that we needed to do July 20th and keep it all straight. I know Kara's pretty good at sending out reminders, but that stuff will only really go to the grant recipient. So any of you that are dealing with reporting finances or deliverables or, you know, getting stuff in to the grant recipient, you may not be aware of when this deadline is. But again, if we're asking this of the grant recipient, then we really would need the sub-recipients to get things in sooner to the grant recipient. Okay. I think this year too, Kara, if you're not familiar with Kara, she's one of our contract managers. We also have a new contract manager, Heba Toulan. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce her last name, Toulan. They are responsible for these items here, deliverables. And there was a request, and we're doing it this year, to have your adjustments in by June 10th. Because if you try to put an adjustment in at the last minute, it may get, you know, be taken care of, but there's so much going on for Kara's sake and also for Heba's sake and for your sake too, to get those things approved or whatever they needs to be done. They need some time to work with. So they're asking for June 10th for those adjustments. And then we would like you to complete the detailed program review. Now, this isn't an official deliverable in terms of like the contract requires it, but we are putting it in with the end of the year report. So the quarter report, this will be on there as an item to do. So look for that also. Okay, so we covered all of this stuff for the end of the year checklist, or some of it. So who would use the end of the year checklist, and how would you use the end of the year checklist? So I'm not sure how people do this in the field, but I know there's a lot of different areas to be covered, some data, some finance, some PD, staff related. And I don't know about you, but I can't try to pretend like I'm an expert in every area. That's why I have such an awesome team and team members, where if I'm like, I need help with this, I can reach out to someone. And I'm very confident that they're going to be able to provide the support that I need. So I would really say, make this a team effort. I would say, you know, figure out what is being asked and see, you know, who can help with those different areas. And for a consortium, this is also important. So, you know, you may have a lead, but you really need your partners to also do the things on the list to make sure everything's closed out properly. So that's where communication would be very important. It's time sensitive in the respect that the first deadline really is July 15th, but you're getting this almost 2 months in advance. So there shouldn't be a reason, you know, it's not that you're not getting enough time to do some of these things. You should be getting prepared and knowing what's the expectation, and then kind of, you know, working your way down the list. Maybe there are some things you can finish before July 15th. Who on your staff could best assist? So who has experience or knowledge to get the task done? So as I mentioned, there's different areas looking at, okay, who would be best qualified to manage what we're asking for here in terms of getting the data in on time. Who would be best to get the PD in on time? You probably have your PD leads and all that kind of stuff. So maybe you're making them responsible for a certain section. And then last, you should have a lead. And why is that important? Because if you don't have one person, and usually in some cases that would be like a project management. In this case, maybe it's the quality assurance or program accountability person. They're just the person making sure that everything is happening, because things can fall through the crack. And that's why we have this checklist. So you're not having to think of everything on your own. But you want to look for that person who has a reputation for following through. One, because if that person isn't known to follow through on things, they may not be the best person to be a lead on something. And then also, are they good at delegating? So if you make someone a lead and they're not good at delegating, guess what? They're going to try to do that checklist by themselves. And they may, again, not be familiar with all those things. So it has to be someone who's comfortable with saying, hey, you know what? I think you would be best to handle this, and let them handle it, but making sure there's accountability and you're following up with them. All right, so before we go on break, I want to ask you, again, this checklist has been out in the field for several years now, every year for, gosh, probably at least the last 3-4 years. What have been some of the benefits for you using the end of the year checklist? If you could go to menti.com and type in the code 5995702 and just let us know what have been some of the benefits for you. And if that doesn't work for you, just go ahead and put it in the chat. We'd appreciate it. Clean data keeps us on track. Okay. Compliance. I'd like to think there's less thinking for you. I would feel that way. Oh, thank you. I just have to check things off. That's awesome. It takes some stress off of me because I have a million things I have to think about. Keeps us organized. Okay, great. I'm not seeing anything showing up here. I mean, I would probably have to go to the website, and I really don't want to have to do that. So really keeps me, nothing is missed. Organized to assure all things. Great, thank you. Checks and balances. Keeps you from forgetting something. And come on, let's be honest here. It's hard to remember everything some days. unless you got sticky notes all over the place, or you're really good at keeping things on your phone, which I'm not. I am not like one of those people who likes to put lists in my technology. Serves as a guide, okay. Different staff with items on the checklist, awesome. Felicia, we're gonna better priority time. Yeah, that's important. Time, you can't buy that. So time being so valuable, you wanna make sure that things get done. And if you're scrambling around trying to figure out, did we remember this? Did we remember that? That can be very stressful, especially at the end of the year. All right, so thank you for your comments. I really appreciate it. Oh, Heather, you showed up. Cool. Check and balance organization. Nice. I did something right when I was doing this PowerPoint last night or 3 in the morning. Thank you, everybody.
So we have another question from Paul. Another off topic, while we were on break, any recommendations on coastal camping sites in Oregon? Well, that sounds lovely, Paul. Anybody have any responses to Paul? Go ahead and put them in the chat. And I have 1120.
Astoria, Lori says. All right, so let's get this train running again. Someone reached out, was like, take a breath. I tend to talk too fast and get really excited sometimes. Oh, so I noticed here in the Mentimeter responses, someone said, inspect what you expect. That's something that our team member, Veronica Moore, says all the time. So I'm wondering if she's in here secretly, because I know that she was up in Dallas, or if it's maybe someone she works with regularly that's kind of adopted that saying. Todd says I'm way too hyper. Yeah, I'm a little hyper right now. I apologize. And then someone also mentioned next year PD plan goals. So I don't know who put that in there, but if you think the checklist was awesome, you're really going to like this detailed program provider review. So let's go ahead and get into that now. Okay, so the detailed program review, just kind of, you know, a real easy explanation of it. It's really a tool to help the program or providers take a good in-depth look at how things showed up for the year, right? I don't know if you have your own review process in place, or if you have a strategic way of doing your planning. But I think effective planning really requires being honest about how you were showing up, or, you know, if I was doing something, how I was showing up. That's the only way I would really be able to make improvements. And it takes asking a lot of questions, right? So, you know, what, you know, did we try to accomplish? Did we really get where we need to be? If we didn't, why? You know, what are some things that we need to do differently? Because maybe what we've been doing for some time is not getting us anywhere. It's not helping us to make improvements. Or maybe we need to try to see things from a different lens. So in the detailed program review, it is a little lengthy. It's 16 pages this year. I think it's a little shorter than it was last year. But these are all the areas that we touch on with this document. So services and enrollment, staff, testing, comprehensive assessment, classes, MSGs, compliance and monitoring, partnerships. Now, I know in general, there's a monitoring requirement. You need to have a plan, but let's just be honest. A monitoring plan, a lot of times, is modeled after what our TWC monitoring department looks for. And that's a lot of, you know, did this document match what was in Teams? Was the data, you know, entered the way it was supposed to be? Did we collect all of the compliance documents? It doesn't get into things like services necessarily, like how well did we do in that classroom? How many of the students actually got an MSG? Those things aren't looked at by monitoring, but those are things that should be looked at if you're wanting to have a quality program, have quality services. So this detailed program review, I know it seems pretty lengthy, but it starts to ask those types of things. And quite honestly, there's probably a lot more that could be asked. But we don't know everything that needs to be asked of yourselves for your program, because everybody's unique, every program is unique. So again, this tool can be modified. We only ask for it once a year. You're more than welcome to take it and modify it for your program. But what we're asking for is what we've submitted and provided to you. But throughout the year, maybe you take some of those items and you add them to what you're currently doing for monitoring or reviews. Maybe some things you hadn't thought about, or maybe you're doing even more than we're suggesting. But we wanted to provide that to you. And I'll talk about how it's a little bit different this year than it was compared to last year. So what is a detailed provider review? Again, it's a tool that is used to assist with program evaluation and assessment. It aids in planning. So I will talk about how we use it for planning, but it could also be used for you. So we're getting to the end of the program year, and I'm not sure how you do your planning, but again, it's always good to have something on a document where you can then streamline it and really focus on key areas that were identified and say, okay, for the new program year, we really want to focus on this. And it's kind of what we do as program specialists. It's also something we do with any program that has been on a CAP, a corrective action plan. We go into detail with the programs in this way, and we ask all these questions because it helps us to understand. It helps us to go beyond just looking at the data and trying to find out what needs to be changed or done differently so we can see improvements. So it's going to be sent out annually towards the end of the closing year. We'd like it to be completed and returned by July 20th. And you're like, oh my God, that's when everything's happening. Well, again, we're giving you 2 months in advance. So my suggestion is what I had mentioned earlier. Find your team, break this down, see who would be best at tackling what area, and take it on that way. This can be used for both the consortium and sole programs. And what we ask is that if you are a consortium, let's say you're 3 partners, that each member does an evaluation for their own program. And why do I say that? Because even in a consortium, every program works differently. You can't compare one to the other. It's very rare that they're all following the same procedures. It's very rare that they're all offering even the same services. So, to get a very good idea of what's going on in your partnerships, you would want to each do this individually. Okay, I'll get to that, Susan. Yeah, so once this is completed, the grant recipient, so if you're a subrecipient, you would provide this to your lead consortium member, lead grant recipient, and they would submit it to the program specialist. So the program specialist is going to receive this information once it's complete. So as I mentioned before, you can take this document and you can then use it for yourselves. So that's pretty much what it is in a nutshell. I'm going to go over I'm going to break down the areas a little bit, but I'm not going to go into each area. There's a lot of information and that would be really time consuming. So I'm going to leave it up to you to read it, to review it, and reach out to us if you have questions. Okay, so the thing that I want you to know, again, this is something you can do on your computer. We ask for who the grant recipient is. If it's a subrecipient filling out, and maybe we need to modify that so it says grant recipient / subrecipient or something, you would put the name in. If you know the contract number, you put that in. Who is filling this out? So you're probably going to have multiple people doing work on this, but you're going to have one lead. You're going to have that one person that's responsible to making sure that this thing gets complete the way that it should. And then their title. Now, targets. So for grant recipients, that's easy. You guys are very familiar with the targets. You get the information regularly. If you're subrecipient, the situation is different because you are probably going to get your targets from your grant recipients. So if you're a subrecipient filling out, then you would put your targets, whatever you're getting in these areas. So what is your part of the pie, right? How many 12 plus enrollments are you supposed to handle in the program year? Also IET target, all of that kind of things. Now, this is something I want to mention. Everything that I'm talking about today is public information. This is nothing, every single resource that is on this document, anybody could have access to. Where we're getting this information from, it's a click away. And generally it's going to be found on our website, or it'll be found on the TCAL website. And you'll have PDFs, or you'll have some kind of, document on a web or something that you could read. So in terms of targets and performance measures, so again, grant recipients, you know what I'm talking about, performance-based funding, all of that kind of stuff. If you're a subrecipient, you might have kind of heard about some of these things. But if you want to know more about it, you can go to what's put at the top reference, our AEL letter 0122. That gives all the information in terms of what targets were given to all the grant recipients, what their performance measures were. And we do this every year. Every year there is a public document that is put out in the form of an AEL letter where anybody in Texas could go and look at this information and see what the allocations were, see what the targets were. It's not a secret. We also have monthly performance reports, but these only go to the grant recipients, and they may or may not share them with the subrecipients. It's their option or their choice. But the monthly performance reports are compiled by one of our internal departments called I3. They recently changed their name. They were Department of Innovation, Operational Insight, Department of Operational Insight previously. Now they're I3, which don't ask me what it stands for at this moment. It's like Innovation, Information, and Insight or something like that. They're the ones who do the reports for us. They go into Teams and they pull the information. They don't use Teams reports though. So the POP report, MSG stuff, they are not doing that. They're pulling stuff on the back end, and they are providing the numbers to us and removing any duplicate participants that would normally show up on our reports, or any anomalies that really shouldn't be showing up in the information. So those are the monthly performance reports. Those get shared with the grant recipients when they become available. And then the TWC performance guide. Now this is a new guide that was put out this program year, I believe. And it's going to tell you a lot about the MSGs. It's going to tell you a lot about the different types of services and measures, the credential measure, the employment measure. Credential and employment are measures that we track after students exit. So if you want information on that, if you're really wanting to understand this grant, I would suggest getting familiar with those documents, with the performance guide, with the AEL letters. Okay. Another thing you have to remember in pulling the data, if you're pulling the data for yourself, some of you are really good at it. I know a couple of you, Dr. Honold, Armando, Felicia, Clute, Terry Shimins, you know Teams. But there are people who have never been comfortable with Teams. Yes, it's not like the most user-friendly. Yes, there's a lot of things that could be improved on it. But if you really want to get some data, you can get some data. And the POP report and the MSG report are going to be your best options for one reason. And I'm going to try not to complicate this too much. You all are familiar with periods of participation, or you should be. So that's a POP. A POP is basically when someone becomes a participant after 12 direct hours, they maintain that status until they're exited. So all their hours will follow them, and they're captured. So those are that's the methodology that's used on the MSG reports and the POP reports. Now you have the older reports, which were basically inherited from TEA. We got this system from TEA when the funding came over. The older reports are based on program year. So the very specific thing to remember about that is a person is not counted as a participant unless they get 12 hours in the program year. So what does that mean? That means when you're pulling participants with those reports, you're not going to get all the participants. You're only going to get the ones that got 12 hours in that program year. But anybody that was already a participant and only got 1 direct hour, they're not going to show up on that report. That's why, it's like, we got used to using them and then we needed to stop using them because they're not giving us accurate numbers. When you're using the POP report, you need to put in the dates that you are filtering for. So if you want to capture the information for this past program year, when you're doing this report, you're going to put in July 1st to June 30th. That's really, really important because you're not going to be able to move forward until you put those dates in. The MSG automatically works with the program year that's selected. So it'll, this year will probably show up if you try to pull information. So I know that's a lot, but for those of you who know what I'm talking about, I'm going to hope that your new team members, you're reaching out to them, you're empowering them to understand all this great history that you've been part of, really. I mean, you've been through this process and you are hearing this for the millionth time, but for new people, it can be very confusing. So what are the different parts that we're looking at? Can you say that again about the MSG? MSG can be earned in the current program year. So yeah, so for participants, every program year, they need to get at least 1 MSG. Everyone that becomes a participant, anyone that gets 12 direct hours, they are now on the hook for getting an MSG unless they have some kind of exemption, which is somewhere in our guidance. And I think it's on this form somewhere with a reference. So if you're looking at the form, 16 pages long, it's somewhere in there, I'm sure. So let's look at the different sections here. So again, you'll be able to select yes or no here, really easy, clicking the button. So that first section, services and enrollment, we're just really asking, was this done? Did you get MSGs? The answer is probably going to be yes. You probably have 1 person with an MSG in there, or you were shooting for that. There's also, total enrollment. There's going to be reportable individuals. Those are people who have not gotten 12 hours yet. But the thing that's being done differently is we're asking you to be more specific in what that number is. So you would select yes, we did that. We enrolled some people. Then in teams, you're going to pull that number. So for example, for total enrollment, my mouse is acting weird here. For total enrollment from teams, you're going to put it here. That way you can easily compare it to what your targets were. And everything's on one sheet, as opposed to looking at multiple reports. So it's just kind of filling in the blank, getting the information and filling in the blank. The other thing that is different is not only do we tell you or show you how to pull the information from teams, and that too was updated. So I know that when I originally wrote this out last year, we kind of put it out quickly. I had a chance to go through it again and really look at, is this being pulled correctly? So step by step, pull the MSG report. The next thing you do, select reporting year, pretty specific step by step. This would be a good training manual for someone who's just getting into teams, like have them do a practice exercise. I think this would be useful for that too. The other thing that we did this year was we added references and resources. So in this case, if you want to learn more about MSGs, you would go to the performance guide, and that reference is here, and you can go directly to MSGs, credentials, enrollment targets, performance-based funding. All of that is talked about in the performance guide. Any questions yet?
We just had a clarification from Jeannie, who asked about the MSG can only be earned in the current program year. And she said, okay, I thought I heard different. Yes, EFL or workforce, correct?
So the MSG, if you want to get credit for the MSG, it has to happen in the program year. If it happens next year, you get credit for it next year, but you didn't get credit for it this year.
But it can still be either.
For what?
Jeannie, EFL or workforce? Jeannie, do you want to unmute and ask your question so we make sure we're answering
Oh, I
the,
didn't know we could. Yes, yes. So I just wanted to make sure that it's the MSG that's earned can either be an EFL or a workforce. It doesn't, so it's not for the IET.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Like you no longer have to get one of each.
One
Right?
or
So an
each.
IET,
It's
see,
still
you're
that.
someone that's vaguely familiar with this stuff. So you're kind of just like talking like kind of abbreviating.
I'm sorry.
But we have people on the call that are like, what is she talking about? Like me too.
I know. I'm sorry. So yeah, so before we had to do if you were IET, you had to have MSG in workforce and an educational functioning level. But this past year, it changed to one either or, and so I just wanted to make sure that that was
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Only one. So in the past, you had to, because they were broken up in two types of MSGs. You had your education and then you had your workforce MSG. Anybody that was in an IET doing training, you had to get one of each. And there was a difference there too. If you got one of the education one, it had to happen within the program year. If you wanted to get the training one, it had to happen when they were in that period of training. And that period of training could overlap. So, but now they have to at least get one or either or at least one in the program year. And that's all mentioned in the performance guide.
quick clarification. So let's say that they start a class in, where are we? We're in May. They start a class in May. They're gonna earn their 12 direct hours, so they'll count as a participant. They are enrolling in a training class this, I think it's like starts in June. So like end of May when the contextualized class starts, and then the class starts like 2 weeks after the training class starts, 2 weeks after that. And so, but that training class may not end before June.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got their 12 hours prior to June 30th, they are still on the hook for an MSG this program year.
Yes, and that's where when they come into your program and they're doing their goal setting, you have to look at a couple of things. One, what is the service, or what is the outcome they're trying to achieve? Is it an HSE, is it completing training? And how long is it going to take? Right. So you already know when the class is going to end. Yeah, they're probably not going to get that 3, 4, or 5. Let's aim for post-testing for this program year. So that's when you would fall back on that educational option. Okay.
So then we would heavily move into, because that class is going to end. So we would post-test kind of early, because, they might not hit their publisher hours, but we would post-test early to attempt an MSG at that point.
Yes.
And then because we post-test early, we'll fill out the post-test justification form, but then we would also note in teams that we post-tested because of attempt for MSG.
Yeah, I mean, you would say that, they're enrolled late in the year and we're aiming for them to get some type of MSG. Gotcha. But remember, for each of these measures, there is a target. It's not we say everyone needs to get one, but in reality, it's about 50% of all participants. And that's not what I'm encouraging. You definitely want to try to get some type of performance with them to show that they've made progress. But, if you're running late in the year and it's not going to really benefit you to test them, because when you test them, they end up not passing. Right. Just because you're really trying to get that MSG, you want to look at, okay, if we've already achieved 50% or 60% of that goal, do we really, really need to progress test these people at this point in the year?
Okay, because they're going to continue on in the next program year in a different class. So I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure that, because it's only maybe 2 or 3 classes that are starting. So it's not going to be the big program. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We got about almost 15 minutes left. And I'm sorry, I love answering your questions, but we're probably going to hold off on the rest of the questions until the end of this presentation. But please continue to put them in the chat. Again, if we don't get to you now, we will do a follow-up Q&A, or we will reach out to you. So if you want to have a conversation with us, please, or not with us necessarily, if you're subrecipient, still let us know who you are, and we can direct you to, who would be the best person to speak to in your consortium. Okay, let's see, where are we at? Okay, so again, looking at, what you're dealing with here in terms of what's available now, the ask, what happened, what was the outcome for the year? Put that in the Teams data. There's instructions provided to you on how to get that information. And also, where do we get some background policy or guidance to tell us more about this area that's been asked about? Okay, so services, again, this is just kind of a snapshot of things. I'm trying to see if there was something in specific I was trying to address here. One thing I do want to mention, anybody that, this is really important. So this question right here. So we don't always think about people that don't make the 12 hours because they're not on the hook for anything. They're not counted as participants. But I would highly recommend comparing how many people didn't get 12 direct hours to the total people you serve. You may find out it's pretty significant. In some cases, it may even be up to 30% of the people that came to your services. So if you're planning and looking to improve, you might be asking yourself, okay, why is that happening? Obviously, it's happening within the first 12 hours or less, or even before they get a direct hour. Is something happening in orientation? Do we need to improve that? Do we need to improve their transition from orientation into the classroom? It's pretty significant and telling if that many people are coming to you for services and they're not staying with you for the 12 hours. So you may want to look at that. Okay, so what's different this year? Some questions were modified, removed, or merged. The source column now includes resources and references. Content was added to align with changes to policy, and the scope of how it will be used in planning has broadened. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. So what does this look like on your end as a provider? If I'm a provider and I want to use this, because I just love looking at my program and seeing all these different areas. So you get the template today. You received it in the email, most likely. By July 20th, you got 2 months to complete this with the Teams data. So the MPR, or monthly reports, do not come out very quickly. More than likely, what you're going to see is the reports that come from our I3 department not being available to our department until July 31st. So what does that mean for you? That means, you're not getting the data that you could use for planning. If you're only relying on those MPR reports and you yourself aren't tracking the data in some way, whether it's with Teams or maybe with OneFlow or something like that, you're at a disadvantage and you're already behind the curve when it comes to taking action and being prepared going into the new program year. So this way you'll have the Teams data, it gets shared with us, and then you can then review the information and potentially use it for your planning, right? I know that you guys do PD planning, at least there's a PD plan that's required. And, generally with the PD plan, you should be looking at, okay, what type of PD is going to best serve us, knowing what your program looks like and where, you really need some work. Then you can make a better call on what PD you want to request. So this is what it looks like on the side for providers. So again, when you get the data back, and I want to show real quick, you have the Teams data column, but then you also have the monthly reports column. So what would happen is you fill out the Teams data, you send it to us, we get a chance to review the information. You already have your information and some data. You get the monthly reports whenever they come out, if they come out. Then you can add it to the monthly reports column and you can compare. It's easier to then compare because everything's on one page as opposed to like, oh, let me get this report and that report. Because when you get the monthly reports, they're also Excel spreadsheets. They're not like a nice package that you get. So that's a recommendation. And even the report cards. So the report cards that get it set out, grant recipients, you know what I'm talking about. We have to wait for the monthly reports. That is not something that can be created until we get those reports. And Kara's pretty quick. She usually turns them around with 1 or 2 days, which is nice. But again, you're waiting till 15 days past when data validation actually happened. Okay, moving forward. We will be asking for feedback on this. Again, this is the second year we're officially putting it out. Those that we've worked with intensive services who were on corrective action plan had to go through a similar process. So they're very familiar of, you know, these documents and these questions. But we want feedback. We would definitely like to know, how can we improve this? Did it really benefit you? How can we modify it so that it's more effective and it's answering questions that you have? So what does this look on our end with TWC? So May 19th, you're getting the information. We should be getting things back on July 20th. And then from July 21st to the 31st, the plan is to review these documents, and we'll also be sharing them with the PD specialist. So that is new to our process. This isn't something we did before, or it may have been done to some capacity depending on the program specialist. But it wasn't something that we all did across the board consistently, but this is how we're trying to change things in our department, where things are more consistent. The staff is all on the same page and how we're working and looking at information. So we'll review this information, we'll share it with the PD specialist. So we'll have about, you know, a week, maybe we'll give ourselves a little bit more time depending on what the reviews look like. August 1st, the plan is for us to then work with the PD specialist to sit down and start thinking about, you know, how can we work collaboratively to provide TA and PD. And then also, you know, developing what we think would be good for statewide TA and PD, depending on what types of results we have. If we're seeing something show up enough times where programs are needing assistance, then we say, okay, instead of meeting with each program individually, we're just doing one statewide recorded TA that gets put into the PD portal that will be accessible when anybody needs it. So the big picture results, we're looking at aligning PD and TA with identified areas for program assistance. Getting a better track of whether PD and TA are actually having an impact in the field. That has been something really difficult to manage. Now, when we did the intensive service model, PD was provided as needed, depending on where we were in working with a program. So I think we saw a better result because there was a connection of why the PD should be happening or needed to happen. Continue to bring the TWC technical assistance team and PD specialists together in a joint effort in providing services to programs. So the TWC technical assistance team consists of the program specialists and the contract specialists, and us working now with the PD specialists. So it's a collaborative effort. We're sitting down and we're not working in silos, or at least that's the vision. That's our kind of focus and goal for this year. And then also more effectively identify statewide PDTA needs for statewide facilitated trainings. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's more IET stuff. Maybe it's more, you know, processes and procedures like this that would be helpful for program improvement. We just don't know until we look at the results. Okay, so we're going to be winding down here, and I can't believe I made it in time. I want to know, how are you planning on rolling into the new year? Are you A? Are you B? Are you going to be dancing? Or is this you? Does my hair look good? That's the main concern for the new program year. Why don't you put it in chat if you have another answer? I don't know if you can put like memes and stuff in the chat, but if you could do that, that might be funny. C, okay, lots of C's. A. B, A through C, yeah, that's right, because we're all different on different days. That's awesome. Sometimes it's hard to get through the summer, right? It's so hot. It's like slow to move and all that. Yes, vote for Pedro. That's right. Definitely C for sure. That's right. Am I looking good? That's what it's all about. Am I looking good? Well, awesome. I hope that you all do have a great end of this year. We're getting so close to it. Some of you are already winding down for sure. We look forward to your information, and we're definitely going to use it. It's not going to be a deliverable in the respect where it gets sent in and nothing is done with it. I mean, that's not fun, right? Okay, oopsie. All right, now we do have some time for questions. C looks just like me. So we have some time for questions if anybody has them. We have about 5 minutes. Happy to address anything.
We had one from Pilar. Is the funding code associated with a class or does it follow the student? What happens if a student is attending 2 different types of classes with 2 different funding codes?
Okay, so it's attached to the student in the class, and you can actually have different funding codes attached to different students in the same class. Or you can have the situation that you just mentioned, Pilar, where if they're in one class, they have one funding code, and in another class, they have another funding code. The important thing to remember is the funding code really should be associated with the service that they are receiving. And that's really what the class should be set up for. So given an example, if you're working with internationally trained professionals, and that's the service that's being provided in that class, then the funding code that is associated with that service should be attached to those students in that classroom. Does that answer your question?
Pilar had to step out for a bit, but I think this will clarify what she needs to know. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else have questions? Wow, we did it, everybody. Couldn't have done this without you. 2 hours. How are they counted towards enrollment when a participant has money? Oh, okay. So they're counted once each for each area of service, but they're only counted once for total participation. So I have a student that's participating in an IET. If they get the direct hours that are required, they're counted as a participant. I get credit for that IET. They're also in a HSE class or something, and they're participating in basic services. Well, in that case, it's only total enrollment, but like, let's say a special service, what else? Maybe they left regular classes and now they're taking classes for workplace literacy. They would be getting credit, gosh, in that case for intensive. So internationally trained professionals and workplace literacy, intensive services is counted as one thing, but you have 3 areas that you can get credit for with that service. So they would be counted once for intensive services and once for in total enrollment. Does that clarify things, Tara? Okay. So right now we only have 3 main targets because we did away with all the EL civics targets and stuff. We have total enrollments, we have intensive, and we have IET. And within IET, there are 3 areas that you can provide service for in intensive services. So any of those 3 only really count once for intensive services target. So again, we narrowed things down so the targets are really 1 total, intensive, and then IET. I don't believe it, Christopher. Okay, everybody, it's 11:58. I don't want to keep you from your lunch. I know you're probably hungry, but I do appreciate you joining me today. I hope it was beneficial. Oh, can I repeat my last sentence? Which one? About enjoying your lunch? You're welcome, everybody.
Kelsey says IET and ITP.
So IET is integrated education and training. And that is, you know, when you're providing training to an individual, but they're getting contextualized instruction and workplace preparation. And then you have your ITP, or internationally trained professional. People say it different ways, but basically an individual outside of our country who has gotten a advanced degree. Sometimes it's an associate's, bachelor's, PhD, master's degree.
Yes, Ellen, and I'm so sorry. Cut you off while you were talking. You were answering someone's question and you were explaining about if they were, when you started with intensives and if they were to switch between intensives, they would just be getting credit for enrollment in the first intensive they were a part of. And then I thought you went into IET, these same students, if they were to be ITP, then went to IET or vice versa. I know you did a presentation at Haley and then mentioned, and we've been trying to figure out, I know it's allowable, but how are they counted? So if a student was ITP, they can now go to IET, but when you look at us, they're just counted as ITP for the year? Or?
No, they'll be counted for the IET and the ITP.
Oh, great. I thought I misheard you just now. Okay, I just wanted to be sure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, but only once for total enrollment.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. This is recorded, so whenever it gets up on YouTube, you can go there and share it with whoever needs it. Maybe there's other staff that they could benefit this from, and definitely share that detailed provider review. Even though, you know, they may not use it for a checklist, there's a lot of resources in there that point you to the direction of understanding, you know, some of those specific things like the MSGs and the IETs and all of that. All right, great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Elena. Great job. Lots of thank yous coming in the chat for you.
Thank you.